Hi folks, in this video we start to discuss Beauvoir's existentialist ethics. In many ways, Beauvoir is similar to Nietzsche. She's an atheistic philosopher who doesn't think that we need to rely on Christianity or religion in order to explain how we have meaning in our lives. On the other hand, though, she sides with Dostoevsky against Nietzsche in the sense that she believes that there is something fundamental that ties us together as human beings. And this is going to be the basis of a shared set of values, of a kind of universal ethics. So she thinks Nietzsche is wrong, that we need to transcend ethics and move beyond good and evil and invent our own systems of value that are just relative to our own interests and what we think is great and creative. Instead, everybody has a certain kind of burden, according to Beauvoir. And her philosophy is exploring how merely being agents in the world, being humans who act, we necessarily take on the burdens of freedom, and that kind of responsibility that goes along with it is going to allow her to uncover some universal values. But unlike Dostoevsky, she doesn't think that we need God or something supernatural or a deity in order to underwrite those ethics. We don't need to promise that we're going to be punished in the afterlife, and that's what's wrong with doing something bad. Instead, she thinks it emerges out of existentialism and the human condition, our subjectivity, that there are universal principles that connect us. Let's look at some of the quotes. So she examines this line that Dostoevsky puts in the mouth of Ivan: if God does not exist, everything is permitted. So Ivan, of course, Dostoevsky's nemesis, his antagonist, says this line. But remember, there's a way in which I argue that Dostoevsky agrees with this too. Something does have to underwrite universal principles for Dostoevsky. But what Beauvoir thinks is it doesn't emerge from God. Because if you think about it, there's a way in which God provides a kind of safety net. Like if you do something terrible, according to Christianity and according to Dostoevsky even, there is recovery. Because, in the standard Christian story, even no matter how bad an act that you have done, if you ask for forgiveness, you can be absolved of your sins. And if you think about it, if somebody believes in the afterlife, then of course that takes away a bit of the responsibility for these finite temporal events, because God is going to rectify things. He's going to level the scales in the afterlife. And even if you happen to do something wrong, but maybe you also repented and get saved, then what's the bad of it? Sure, somebody was injured by your actions, but God is going to help them. God is going to make everything right in the long run. That is the traditional conception of Christianity. And Beauvoir is saying, actually, there's a way in which that picture mitigates, it destroys responsibility for us. And if there is no God, that doesn't lessen responsibility, like Ivan might have said, or Dostoevsky even perhaps thought, or Nietzsche might say. Instead, that heightens our responsibility, because God can never make it better. If you do something terrible to somebody, then that is it. They have suffered, and it is up to you. It's your responsibility. God's not going to make it better. If you want to rectify your relationship with them, then you need to take that on. Nothing absolves you. Nobody can atone for your sins. You have to deal with the fact that you've done something terrible. That is how responsibility is heightened in light of Beauvoir's atheism, rather than diminished. Now, the concept of responsibility for her is intimately tied with the concept of freedom. So we saw that in Sartre, who has also discussed the concept of freedom thoroughly, freedom led us to despair. Freedom forced us to make decisions, and those decisions merely punished us. In Beauvoir's play No Exit, for example, we see that these characters can't accept the demands of freedom, and it leads them to simply torture each other. So really, in many ways, Sartre is much more pessimistic, and Beauvoir provides a way in which freedom doesn't have to necessarily lead to despair, but freedom can actually be a principle that underwrites our universal ethics. So understanding how this goes is a key part of the existentialist ethics that Beauvoir explores in this book, The Ethics of Ambiguity. We can see really clearly her thesis here. By turning towards this freedom, we're going to discover a principle of action whose range will be universal. So here we can see here clearly siding against Nietzsche, that there are things that are there are demands on us. There are things that tie us together and tie us back together to society against Nietzsche's individualism. Now, how she explores this is through this really interesting persona of the passionate person. Her book actually has a whole bunch of different characters and discussions. So it would be really fantastic to read it in its entirety. But we simply don't have time. we can only read fractions of all of these philosophers. So we're going to look at Beauvoir's discussion of the passionate person in really interesting ways. This connects with Camus' novel, The Stranger, which many people are going to be familiar with. So I think this really makes a fantastic piece. So what is going on with a passionate person? Because this is one of Beauvoir's foils. This is one of the people who she thinks is leading a deeply problematic sort of life. Well, the passionate person embraces freedom in a certain way, but they don't do it in a way that accepts the responsibilities that freedom really involves. So what they experience freedom as is a freedom to do absolutely whatever they want. It is, and that means it's a sort of separation, because freedom doesn't make me closer to any of the other people in the world. It makes me farther away from them because I bear no responsibility to them whatsoever. That's what this absolute conception of freedom means. And the person, she calls this a passionate person because this is somebody who just is wildly embracing what's going on in life and isn't willing to be held back by anything. And we can see how, in a sense, if a person is living like that, they're not even held back by their fellow feelings to other people, then this could lead to a kind of tyrannical kind of life. A person who doesn't think that they owe anything to anybody else. And Beauvoir says there's a way in which this connects with a partial nihilism. I think she really does have Nietzsche in mind, and she realizes that the problematic aspects of the way of life lived by the passionate person provides a grounds for criticizing the sort of moral relativity that emerges in Nietzsche, because this is precisely going to help motivate her grounds for a universal ethical principle. In a really interesting way, so this is the way in which the language ties us to Camus' The Stranger. Think about the concept of a stranger. It's a person who is not a friend of ours, not an acquaintance of ours, not somebody who's related to us. So somebody who experiences freedom as separation, this is like Yvonne, this is like the characters in Dostoevsky's novel who are further and further isolated from each other rather than seeking that kind of loving connection and human community that the chain of the onion provides. Well, Camus' stranger is somebody just like that, who doesn't feel these real connections to other people. He is dead to the world. And in a sense, he's not just estranged from others, he's estranged from the world. The world is not showing up to him as a meaningful way in which he is embedded. And that connects with this idea, he's stuck in a sort of nihilism from which he has not yet emerged. Now, Beauvoir thinks this is deeply problematic, and she has this line, which is so Dostoevskian. I mean, what this means, a kind of passion as isolation in the sense, passion that makes me able to do absolutely anything, is that connects me off from relationships with others, deep, meaningful relationships with others. And of course, if existentially what we need to live authentically and to feel fulfilled as humans involves other relations, then this is a kind of damnation. She even, gives us the Dostoevskian metaphor for it. Of course, she's not going to cast this out in Christian symbols in the way Dostoevsky does. She is clearly just being metaphorical here. Let me give you some of the other quotes I think that are really important and to speak to this theme. This concern for others, and this is looking forward to our next reading as well. This she takes to be fundamental to humans, and this is the sense again in which you have to test these these existential ideas against your own intuitions. If she thinks it's fundamental to you, if you question what are sources of meaning in your life, and you don't think about either friends or family, she thinks there's something deeply problematic, and you're either not being honest with yourself, or you have been given a state which is inherently pushing you toward despair. You happen to be unlucky and stuck in Sartre's universe. But if you have any hope of pulling yourself out of a kind of total nihilism and out of despair, then it's going to be through the ways in which we are bound to other people. And the freedom at which all of us necessarily take on as individuals, as subjects who act in the world, is going to help tie us together to those other people. So the ultimate goal that Beauvoir is going for here is freedom means that I'm not just responsible for myself. She says there is this positive aspect to it. There's this constructive moment in which freedom goes along with my need to act in the world, and the necessity as being the subject. I am somebody who does stuff in the world according to all existentialists, especially folks in the French movement like Beauvoir. So we need to accept what freedom involves. And according to Beauvoir, if we're going to realize that, that means freedom, means not just promoting freedom for myself, which is just going to lead to isolation and despair. That's going to mean promoting my relations to others. And if you think through what that means, according to Beauvoir, you must stop being selfish and you must recognize where people's freedom has been constrained. So promoting freedom for yourself means promoting freedom for all. And that means if you see people being oppressed, what does oppression mean? It means people are in circumstances in which they are denied opportunities. The future is not open to them, but something is standing in their way. And it is other humans who are oppressing, who are constraining that freedom. Beauvoir thinks that we need to side with those who are oppressed. We need to either fight for their liberation, we need to fight for liberation with them, and if we are oppressed, then fight for our own liberation. So these key themes of Beauvoir's, that within existentialism, we see grounds for ethics, and it's a sort of ethics that promotes individuals' freedom, and especially promotes the liberation of individuals whose freedom is oppressed. This is my grounds for locating her in this upper quadrant. So perhaps by a process of elimination, you knew this is where Beauvoir was going. But this, what I want people to get out of this is there's ways in which I'm siding her over here with Nietzsche, because she is in a fully naturalistic, atheistic universe. She does not think, God or any other religious understanding is going to help explain what gives our lives meaning or underwrite meaning in our lives. But on the other hand, Nietzsche and Kierkegaard think that meaning can come in a deeply individualistic way. We do not need others. We do not rely on others for that. And this is the way in which she's actually quite a lot like Dostoevsky. And she thinks that it's our ties to others that provide this meaning. Now, she doesn't think it's done in Dostoevsky's connection of loving relations with others in this deeply Christian way. Instead, it's in a politicized way. So Beauvoir, remember, she's writing this literally when the Nazis are occupying France, and it's starting to come to light that the Germans are committing genocide and are mass killing of Jewish people, and she takes up this mantle, and so she's thinking of this in the immediate terms of the genocide of the Jewish people. That if you are actually going to embrace what subjectivity demands on us, if you are going to find meaning in relation to others, then you can't stand by and watch these atrocious actions happen. It can't be that individuals are merely creating their own values, and all we can do is try to be artists with our lives. Beauvoir says, no, there are things going on in the world. Nobody's going to save it. God's not going to make things better later on. It is up to us to accept the responsibility in order to make this a better world. And that means recognizing oppression where it's occurring and fighting against it. So that is the direction of her ethical views that emerge out of, she thinks, the existential condition. Okay, thanks.